And welcome back to Bengal Bites, a podcast about the Cincinnati Bengals from one fan's real, honest perspective. I'm your host, Derek. This is episode 85. In this episode, we're going to break down everything that happened around and involving the Cincinnati Bengals draft. All the draft picks, undrafted free agents, all the new players that are going to help this Bengals team on their quest for glory in 2025. The draft is about 2 weeks in the rear view. So, as I typically do, I like to let all the other professional podcasters get their 2 cents in. I kind of had to marinate on it a little bit, think about it, come up with something to say, because my immediate reaction from a draft is always the same. I don't know anything about any of these guys. I've never heard of any of these guys in my life. So it's hard to have some kind of reaction about some guys I've never heard of. I don't know. So I had to do a little bit of research. I'm going to be honest with you. I didn't go back and grind the tape and watch like a full game on all these guys. I watched their highlights on YouTube. I mean, come on. What am I supposed to do? I want to get excited about these guys. So I went back and watched the clips that showed them at their best. And then that way I can imagine what they would be like at, the best case scenario. Obviously, these guys aren't going to play like their highlight reels when they get to the NFL for a lot of different reasons. But at least I can hope for a brief moment before all my hopes were crushed by the national media, who came out with their draft grades as they typically do. And for whatever reason, Bengals across the board got like the lowest grades out of all 32 teams. Just consensus across the board, it was like C minus, D, no Fs. I didn't see any Fs for the Bengals because they weren't like totally asleep at the wheel, terrible picks. You can't really argue that any of these picks were totally out of left field. Like, none of these guys were completely off the draft board for anybody. All these picks were within, the top 200, but there's always this argument about all these draft nerds about, well, they didn't get enough value. Well, they didn't pick valuable enough positions, and the players that they picked, I had them lower. Every pick, pretty much, all these people were talking about the Bengals. Well, they picked this guy in the second round, I had him as a third round pick, and they picked this guy in the third round, I had him as a fifth round pick, and all this kind of stuff. Nobody knows, obviously, until they actually get out on the field and play, and we'll have to see. And if you want any consolation as a Bengals fan to kind of cure your sorrows, just remember that 2 years ago, everybody was destroying the Detroit Lions, saying, what are they doing? Drafting a running back and linebacker in the top 15, and then they picked up a tight end in the early second round. Jahmyr Gibbs, Jack Campbell, Sam Laporta. Oh, actually, all those guys are pretty good players, so it doesn't seem like that bad of a draft for the Detroit Lions. Hopefully, something similar plays out for the Cincinnati Bengals, but we'll have to see. But I just wanted to kind of document my feelings, just everything that I was feeling before, during, and after this draft, because everybody, if you're a hardcore Bengals fan like me, you probably were reading all the pre-draft coverage to figure out which players should we be keeping an eye on. Maybe you did some mock draft simulators to just get an idea of who to expect. I don't, think those mock draft simulators are that accurate. Obviously, there's some top name quarterbacks who had a lot of hype behind themselves, and they didn't end up going where they were projected. But just to get some sense of okay, who should I expect in the top 50 names or whatever. So you do that, figure that stuff out. But everybody comes to the same conclusion. So when I heard Shemar Stewart, okay, that was a name that I heard potentially in the top 20, 25 picks. And when the Bengals picked him in the first round, defensive end out of Texas A&M, he was one of these guys who lit up the combine with impressive statistics. Everybody is comparing him to Myles Garrett because they have similar size, similar speed, similar vertical jump. The only issue is they're not necessarily similar skill on the football field. You can have similar dimensions to some guy, but you don't necessarily play the game of football the same way. So when I went and watched some of Shemar Stewart's highlights, I saw a guy who's very big, very fast, very explosive, but not necessarily a great football player, and not necessarily a guy making a ton of plays. Even in his highlights, like, he would be very disruptive and get in the backfield, but not always tackle the guy or make the sack. And even on the sacks they did, like, some of the plays that he made were just like, busted plays where nobody even put a hand on him and he just ran straight through and sacked the quarterback. So not necessarily things that you'll always be able to replicate in the NFL. And Bengals going into this draft only had 6 picks and a lot of deficiencies, you could argue, especially on defense. Going into this, and so the fact that they picked a defensive end made a lot of sense, but keep in mind, going into the draft, Bengals had 2 players that had requested trades. Trey Hendrickson, defensive end, who led the NFL in sacks last 2 seasons, or he led the NFL in sacks last year, and 17.5 sacks both 2 seasons. So he's looking for a raise or a trade to a team that's going to pay him a raise. Bengals haven't been able to capitulate or meet that trade request. So it wasn't a complete surprise. First round, they drafted someone who could give them more leverage in their contract negotiations with Trey Hendrickson. As a Bengals fan, that doesn't necessarily translate to wins and excitement on the field. Like, whether or not they've, obviously Bengals fans would just like them to figure out the contract situation with Trey Hendrickson. Not necessarily gaining leverage over the player isn't what I'm looking for out of the draft. So that pick didn't necessarily excite me. We'll see. We'll see. I hope for his sake that he lives up to all the hype and all the confidence that he seems to exude. He seemed to be mad after he was picked. In the interview, is very interesting. He seemed like visibly upset, and he just said, like, a lot of teams messed up. I think because he talked about he had 15 top 30 visits to teams, in-person interviews with teams that he thought were going to pick him, especially the Dallas Cowboys. And he was just playing down in Texas. So maybe he thought he was going to the Cowboys at number 12, but they took Tyler Booker, guard, instead. So he mentioned that. And then later they asked him, oh, well, were you disappointed you didn't go to the Cowboys? He was like, oh, no, of course not. No, everything happens for a reason, and I'm glad I'm here with the Bengals, basically. But when they asked him about, like, what was his meetings with the Bengals like, he didn't even remember meeting with the coaches at all because he never came to Cincinnati. In all of those top 15 visits, Cincinnati wasn't one of them. And he didn't remember talking to the coaches at all. So that just shows you how memorable this connection was between the Bengals and this player. But he was just like, I'm just glad they remembered me because I didn't remember them. But so just an interesting way to have a player coming on to the team. Like, not necessarily, he wasn't even necessarily that excited about joining the Bengals. I'm sure he's excited about getting drafted and making, more money. But okay, as a fan, I want to get excited about this guy. But in college, he had a grand total of 4.5 sacks, and he will say, look at the tape, and you'll see all these pressures I was getting. And so he had like 29 pressures or something like that last season. He was 3rd team all SEC, all conference. So for a first-round pick, I don't really get excited if you're 3rd team all-conference. Even if the conference is the SEC, arguably the best or one of the best. Ohio State won national championship this year, so maybe the Big Ten is the best conference. Who can say? But one of the top conferences is the SEC. 3rd team all-SEC, first-round pick, I don't know. We'll see. But, that's better than Amarius Mims last season, who only played like half the season for Georgia. And I still say the jury is out on Amarius Mims. Everybody is buying that he was a good pick. I still say time will tell, but they're going to put a lot on his shoulders because they let Trent Brown walk in the offseason. Trent Brown signed with the Texans. Last season, Trent Brown, he only played for like 3 not very good games, and then he blew out his patellar tendon. So it's going to be we'll see, how he responds from rehab. But Trent Brown, if he's able to play for the Texans, that would probably mean the Bengals get a compensatory draft pick next year. So for the Bengals' sake, I hope Trent Brown has a long and productive career, at least next season. But getting off track here, the point is the past 2 seasons, the Bengals have taken risks in their first round picks, and they've been drafting in this middle part of the round. So you're not going to get that guaranteed blue chip Joe Burrow or Ja'Marr Chase. I know the Bengals got a lot of credit for doing a good job in drafts recently. We'll go back and look at some of these drafts, but outside of Joe Burrow, T. Higgins in that 2020 draft, and Logan Wilson in the 3rd round, Joe Burrow, T. Higgins, Logan Wilson, where they were drafting at the top of each one of those rounds. They were drafting number 1 overall, number 33, and then the top of the 3rd round, whatever pick that was, 65 or something. Those picks have all worked out great. Outside of that, they had Ja'Marr Chase, where they're picking number 5. Again, when you're drafting in the top 5, you expect to get one of the best players. Since then, they went to the Super Bowl, so they got Dax Hill, who they picked up his 5th-year option on his rookie contract, which I thought was interesting because Dax Hill, they drafted him originally to be Jesse Bates' replacement at safety. Then he was moved last season to starting outside cornerback, played about 5 games, and then tore his ACL. He's coming back, rehabbing from that injury. I thought it was unlikely they would pick up his 5th-year option just because he's moved positions. He's coming off of an injury. But the Bengals, for whatever reason, decided to keep the faith in Dax Hill. And I guess that means that he's coming back well from his injury. But that's a big risk, I think, to take on a guy who hasn't shown that he's worth that first-round draft pick. But whatever. Then Miles Murphy was the next year. So outside of I'm just kind of glossing over the fact that after that, they had picks after Ja'Marr Chase in the 2nd round in 2021. They traded down, and that's what everybody wanted going into this draft. Bengals fans were talking about, okay, we only have 6 picks. We have a lot of holes on the roster. We need to trade down, get more picks. And after the 1st round, I was like, okay, they didn't trade down, even though we saw other teams before and after the Bengals in pretty much every round of the draft. But, first few rounds are where you get the most draft capital in return. We saw some major trades going down from these other teams, but it seemed like Bengals phones weren't really ringing. I don't know if they were accepting calls. Not a lot of action going on with the Bengals during the draft. And okay, maybe they just really liked Shemar Stewart for whatever reason, even though he only had 1.5 sacks last season. Everybody compares him to Myles Garrett, but Myles Garrett had over 30 sacks in college, and he was an animal, and that's why he was the number 1 overall pick. So, anyway, the first thing that happened in the draft, everybody expected Cam Ward. He goes to the Tennessee Titans. That wasn't really that interesting. I felt bad for him because he got overshadowed by all these other stories in the draft. Nobody was really talking about the number 1 overall pick going to the Titans. Brian Callahan is hoping for his sake that everything works out and they get the next Joe Burrow and all that, and he's able to save his job. But either way, Brian Callahan might be getting fired. But then Cleveland Browns came up and they decided to trade the number 2 pick in the draft to the Jacksonville Jaguars. So everybody in the draft had been predicting Travis Hunter, Heisman Trophy winner, unicorn. They're talking about him like he's Shohei Ohtani, the next dual threat. He can play defense, he can play offense, you get two players in one, and he's the best at both positions in this draft. Oh my gosh. Browns decided to trade that pick away to the Jaguars. Browns went down to number 5 and got Mason Graham, defensive tackle out of Michigan. So that means that Travis Hunter will not be in the AFC North. Bengals won't have to face him as much. Bengals will play the Jags and see Travis Hunter this season, but at least it won't be twice every season. They won't play the Jags that much. So as a Bengals fan, I was at least happy that Travis Hunter won't be going up against the Bengals too much, because he could be a dangerous player in the league. I'm going to be excited to see what he can do, because even though he's not the fastest guy ever, he does have amazing body control moves, shiftiness, and hands, and just the natural aptitude for knowing how to play the game of football. That's one of the things, that's the difference, I think. A guy like him doesn't necessarily have all the natural physical traits of a Shemar Stewart, but a little bit sharper when it comes to playing the game. And maybe it's because, as Shemar Stewart gets more experience, he'll get better. But that's going to be something that the Bengals haven't really been great at recently. Myles Murphy, first round pick in 2023, after 2 seasons, he's only got 3 sacks, and he had 0 sacks last year. And Myles Murphy had an MCL sprain in training camp, so it didn't really work out with him. Some of the recent Bengals draft picks on that defensive line, they're putting a lot of pressure on, because everybody was saying this draft was going to be very deep at defensive interior position. Everybody had all these players like Walter Nolan out of Ole Miss being a highly coveted player, maybe in that middle of the first round. And he actually went to the Cardinals, I think it was, 1 pick before the Bengals at number 16. Maybe if he had still been on the board, Bengals would have picked Walter Nolan instead of Shemar Stewart. We'll never know. Bengals decided, not to trade up to get any super premium position. They just like they did last year. So they didn't trade up or down at any of the picks. They just went into it with all the picks that they naturally acquired, which is very unusual. Most other teams trade at least once. I think it might have been, I forget, maybe the Texans traded every single one of their picks, and the only picks that they had were acquired via trade. So teams are trading picks left and right, not the Bengals. I don't know if it's like a philosophy of we don't want to trade. I don't know what was going on with them, but the thing that really was in the back of my mind was, okay, I understand not wanting to trade down, because like I said, the last time the Bengals traded down, they got Jackson Carman. They were like, oh, everybody in that draft was like, oh, the Bengals are geniuses. They traded down and they got Jackson Carman. It's like, oh my God. Jackson Carman was one of the worst draft picks the Bengals have ever had. So let's not have a repeat of that and trade down and get a worse player. Let's maintain our draft position, and if anything, maybe trade up. So the fact that they had Trey Hendrickson, okay, I understand he's too valuable. You don't want to get rid of him. But then they also had inside linebacker Germaine Pratt. He's getting up there in age. He's expensive. Maybe we can get rid of him. There's lots of linebackers in the draft. You can get in the later rounds. Get some more draft picks. Get something. And not just keep Germaine Pratt on the roster. And I don't know what they're going to do. So, second round, Bengals didn't move anywhere. They drafted Demetrius Knight Jr., linebacker out of South Carolina. He's 6'3", about 235. Pretty good speed, good tackler. He used to be a quarterback when he originally came into college. I think it was Georgia Tech. So he's got some instincts about just reading plays and how to, break through try to figure out what the offense is going to do to him as a defender. So now he's learning the linebacker position. Hopefully that's going to carry over. The only issue with Demetrius Knight, he's a great guy. And all these guys, I wish nothing but the best for them. I'm going to root for them as a Bengals fan. Now that they're on the Bengals roster, I want them to succeed. However, just like Shemar Stewart, there are pros and cons. And even though he's a pretty good football player, it seems like he only had 1 year of college where he was the full-time starter and really productive on the field. And that happened to be his 6th year of college. Now, normally, most people don't spend 6 years in college, but they have that COVID year that kind of gave everybody an extra year of eligibility. So all these guys, they have like a redshirt year, and then they had the COVID year, and then they started to get NIL money. So now he was getting paid this past season at South Carolina in the SEC. He's married. He's got 2 children, so very mature. And his story was after some of his games, I think it was at Georgia Tech or something like that, he would, after the game, be driving DoorDash to make money to pay, for food for his kids. So he's out there talking about basically how he's playing to literally support his family. So that is, obviously a good, feel-good story. The Bengals, obviously, in this draft were laser focused on getting high character, high quality guys. I think they went back to that strategy they did in I think it was the Joe Burrow draft, where they're drafting like all team captains. Everybody's like Boy Scout, pillar of the community, could be the next mayor of their hometown and all this kind of stuff. Bengals didn't want a repeat of the Germaine Pratt situation where there were like 10 million obvious red flags coming out of everywhere, and Bengals took a chance. They were like, we like this guy's athleticism, the production, the talent is just too great for us to resist. And, they flew too close to the sun. They got burned bad. And now they become, unfortunately, the punchline of what not to do as an NFL team. They're like, when all these NFL analysts go on TV and they talk about draft picks that don't work out because some guy's a knucklehead, first thing they say is like Germaine Pratt for the Bengals. So that's not great PR. Nobody wants to talk about that. And so that's what the Bengals avoided at all costs. A lot of these guys probably don't have the highest ceiling in the world, but they have hopefully a high floor as well. Bengals are like, let's get the steady guy. We're not going to have to worry about where he's going to be late on Saturday night. We know he's going to be at home with his wife and kids. Now that could have its own issues too. You've got 2 young children. How, you've got to split your attention that way as well. You would hope that as a father, he's going to spend some time with the kids and the family and all that stuff. How much time can he devote coming into the NFL as a rookie? He's going to be expected to start if conceivably they get rid of Germaine Pratt, right? Because they drafted this guy in the 2nd round. He's going to be 25 years old. It was misreported in Dane Brugler's The Beast that he was already 25 and everybody took and ran with it. But he's 24 3/4, so not quite 25 yet. But he's going to be 25 when his rookie contract basically starts. By the end of his rookie contract in 4 years, he's going to be 29. So he's going to have to play like immediately, basically. That's a tough jump for a guy who only played really 1 year as a starter. Most of the time he was playing a different position. And then now he's going to be expected to come in and start. That's a lot of pressure on him and a lot of pressure on new defensive coordinator Al Golden, who's coming in. He's been with the organization, obviously, before as linebackers coach. This is going to be his first season replacing Lou Anarumo at defensive coordinator. And the first 2 picks, the Bengals have gone on the defensive side with Shemar Stewart, defensive end. And Bengals definitely missed what Shemar Stewart brings in terms of disruption, athleticism, penetration, getting pressure on the quarterback. Sam Hubbard, who recently retired, was not doing anything like that last season. Shemar Stewart definitely brings that. They also have Joseph Osai on the edge. We'll see how Cam Sample looks coming back from a torn Achilles. But Bengals are taking draft picks, You could say there were other needs, though, or at positions that were more valuable, like cornerback, defensive tackle, inside linebacker. Yeah, I get they need an edge rusher. But like after Shemar Stewart, for example, at pick number 18, the Seattle Seahawks went with guard out of North Dakota State, Gray Zabel. Now, I could see, again, where the Bengals would feel a little bit burned because they had Cordell Volson, different player, obviously, but Cordell Volson, also from North Dakota State, he was a 4th-round pick, though, so it's different. But I feel like the Bengals are like, do we really want to draft a guy from North Dakota State in the 1st round? You could see the way throughout the draft, the Bengals were going big name, like SEC, basically all schools in the South, pretty much. No schools in the North or the West. Everybody in the South from big-time programs. So no North Dakota State in the 1st round. I get, from the Bengals' point of view, why they didn't want to pick him. But you could say there were maybe other players, like the Ravens, I think, later in the 1st round took safety Malachi Starks. Safety was a position that some people thought the Bengals might address in this draft, but perhaps surprisingly to some, Bengals didn't take any safeties. They didn't take any defensive backs at all. No cornerbacks, no safeties, no nickels. They, in the 3rd round, decided to go with a offensive guard, Dylan Fairchild out of Georgia. Now, some people thought that the Bengals would select a guard in the 2nd round. Instead of Demetrius Knight, linebacker, there was Dylan Fairchild's teammate, Tate Ratledge, guard out of Georgia. Now, if you're not familiar with Tate Ratledge, go back and check some of the footage from this past NFL Combine. Tate Ratledge was this guy who basically looked like a carbon copy of Kenny Powers with just an amazing mullet and mustache combination, and he was an extremely athletic player. Now, like I said, athleticism doesn't necessarily count for everything. Miles Murphy also was an extremely good athlete. He hasn't really produced much in the NFL so far, but a lot of people were in love with this Tate Ratledge persona, probably, on social media. I'm, to be honest, not on social media, so I don't know what people are saying. But I would assume there's plenty of Tate Ratledge memes flying around all over the interwebs. So people were a little bit disappointed that the Bengals didn't pick up that guard because there was an obvious need. There's so many holes on the Bengals roster, like obvious holes, that they unfortunately, for whatever reason, didn't address before the draft in free agency. They still had a lot of obvious needs going into the draft, which isn't good. That's like, a lot of people throw around the analogy, that's like going shopping when you're really hungry, at the grocery store. It's like you're gonna not be thinking objectively. You're gonna be thinking with your gut, and when you think about what you need, and not gonna pick the right stuff. So I feel like that's maybe what the Bengals were thinking about in this, because they're like, okay, we've got these 2 players who just requested a trade. All right, the first 2 rounds, we're going to draft players at those 2 positions to give ourselves some kind of leverage or potential replacements for those players if they don't want to play or whatever. But they always talk about, you want to just make the team better, improve your roster. And from a team building perspective, I'm not sure that was the best. But from a winning games perspective. But like I always say, I'm not sure. The Bengals are always into winning the most amount of games. I think it was Bob Trumpy in an interview one time. I'm getting totally sidetracked here, and I apologize. We'll get back to the draft in a minute. We left off Dylan Fairchild, guard, in the 3rd round. And he was another one where people were getting all upset because they picked him at whatever it was, like pick 80 or something like that, and everybody was saying he should be, pick 120 or something. Same thing with Demetrius Knight. I think they picked him at pick 49 and people were saying, oh, he should have been pick number 80. Whatever. Like, he was in the top 100 somewhere. Like, it's not like he's completely not even in the top 200 or something. But my point was, Bob Trumpy, former Bengals tight end, who I think he should be in the Bengals Ring of Honor if he's not already. He's on the list. But he was one of the original Bengals back in 1968. And he said when they originally started practicing with Paul Brown as this first iteration of the Bengals, Paul Brown said he really didn't even care about winning. Winning wasn't his main objective. His main objective was to be a competent football team. Like, just go out there and look like you know what you're doing. Don't look like a bunch of jagoffs who, like a bunch of slapdicks running around not knowing what they're doing. We got to go out here, put on a competent show so that the fans can be, have respect for us or whatever. Like, winning or losing, you got to play the game of football the right way or whatever. And I feel like sometimes the Bengals still have that philosophy where they don't even really care about winning that much. It's like, okay, we just got to get some competent football players so we have somebody at every position where we could say, okay, this guy is good enough. So if we need a replacement at defensive end eventually, let's get some guy, plug him in there, and he'll be good enough. Okay, we need a defensive end. Okay, we need a linebacker. Let's get some guy, okay, and just plug him in there, and he'll be good enough. And whether we win or lose, or whether this is a good strategy, whatever, we'll be, just competent. And to the Bengals' credit, like last season, I think they were had one of the fewest penalty rates in the league, one of the least penalized teams, I should say, in the NFL. It didn't commit a lot of penalties. They were very disciplined, did everything the right way. As Zach Taylor liked to say, all the guys are all about all the right stuff. And that was great. It didn't necessarily translate into wins, but the Bengals didn't care because the stadium was sold out every week. Everybody was buying their Joe Burrow jerseys. They were flying off the shelves. Business was booming for the Bengals. And oh no, they didn't make it to the playoffs. Well, we'll get them next year, guys. Don't worry. I meant to say this like months ago. This is an analogy that came to me. Is if you follow professional wrestling or the WWE, I'm not a current subscriber or anything like that. I had a phase, let's say. But every year, one of the big pay-per-view events in wrestling is the Royal Rumble, right? If you're not familiar, Royal Rumble is an event with 32 contestants who, when they do it, the contestants, you can't have start out with everybody in the ring all at the same time. So they build up the suspense. They bring the guys in one at a time. And so each guy gets his little intro. That's part of the fun of the event, honestly. It's not necessarily the wrestling. It's the fact that you get to see every guy's intro. And they keep the list of contestants a surprise. So you don't know who it's going to be. Who who is going to be number 32? You don't know. So they'll have different weird wrestlers. Most of the big name wrestlers will come out, but a lot of them of the mid-card guys you rarely ever heard of, whatever. But all of them come out and they all, theoretically have a chance to win at the end. If they hang in the rules of the Royal Rumble, not that it matters for this podcast, but if you get thrown out of the ring and your feet touch the ground, you are eliminated from the Royal Rumble. So there's lots of guys getting thrown out of the ring, but somehow they miraculously are able to keep their feet off the ground and they're not eliminated. And then they walk on their hands back into the ring and get back in somehow and tag some guy from, behind from surprise. The point is the NFL is very similar in that regards, in that there's 32 teams, just like in the Royal Rumble, there's 32 wrestlers. They all enter the season with hypothetically a chance to win. But obviously, now in the NFL, I'm not saying this is scripted. I'm not saying that there's a scripted result like there is in wrestling. But in wrestling, there's some guys, don't really have a chance to win. They got to have 32 people in there to say it's a Royal Rumble. But some of these guys are just there kind of just to take up space, right? I'm not saying that's what the Bengals are, but sometimes it feels like they, pump us up like, oh yeah, we got a chance to win this year, guys. Oh, we're going to win the Royal Rumble this year, guys. And then it's like, did we ever really have a chance, or was this just the intro that every other team in the league also does for their fans, blowing smoke up our ass? But anyway, 4th round. Oh, actually, okay, so Dylan Fairchild, I won't shortchange him. He seems like a good guy. Again, I can't really argue against this pick in any way. It's just that he's not necessarily 3rd round pick at guard. It feels like they're counting on him to start right away, which is a lot to ask. I mean, he got, again, 2nd team All SEC last year, which is great. He's a 2-time national champion, so he's got that experience in a big program. Hopefully, I think he is one of Amarius Mims's former teammates, so maybe he's got some chemistry there alongside Amarius Mims. Maybe he could play on right guard, but we'll see. But it's, again, a lot of pressure, just like for a 2nd round linebacker who's going to come in and start at 25 years old. Dylan Fairchild, I think he's 23. I think he was a 5th-year senior. So, again, not the youngest guy in the world, but not super old. But it's a lot of pressure for a 3rd round guy to come in and start right away. He's going to have to compete against Cody Ford and some other guys that they had on the roster. But I think they drafted him with the expectation that he would start if everything goes well. The new offensive line coach, Scott Peters, he's known for his Brazilian jiu-jitsu training and all this stuff. So he talked about how Dylan Fairchild has really strong hands. He's a grappler. Dylan has admitted that he's not necessarily the best in run blocking, but he is good at pass blocking. So Bengals aren't known for their running game in general. They did draft a running back, surprisingly, in this draft. We'll get to that later. But Bengals, they've got Chase Brown on the roster. They retained Zach Moss, who took a pay cut for $350,000 in guaranteed money. Zach Moss basically got his salary cut in half from what it was going to be. So that means that Zach Moss is going to have a better chance to make the roster, most likely, but at a reduced rate. So Bengals like that's a win. Again, is that really making them better on the football field? Zach Moss wasn't really lighting it up that well when he was a starter last season. That was before he had a neck injury that mysteriously put him out for the rest of the season. Bengals have been very tight-lipped about what's going on with his recovery and what the injury was. They never even really said, oh, it's a neck issue. And Zach Taylor has never said anything other than he's progressing. That could mean he's progressing towards retirement. I don't know what that means, but they just said he's progressing. They also have Samaje Perine that they brought back. He's going to be 30 years old, so I don't expect a ton out of him, but at least he'll be better than some of the other people who will go unnamed, but who were on the roster for way too long and didn't do anything, didn't score any touchdowns, even though they were on the team for 6 years. Anyway, 4th round, maybe another surprise, but Bengals went back and picked another linebacker. So 3 out of the first 4 picks for the Bengals were on defense. Bengals got another interior linebacker in Barrett Carter, number 0 out of Clemson. I'm not sure. We'll go back and check what his number is going to be when he's actually on the Bengals. But he went number 0. He's a very high instinct player, maybe even a little bit better than Demetrius Knight. The only issue with Barrett Carter was he's not very tall. He's only about 6 feet tall, still about 230 pounds, but he's pretty fast. He ran about high 4.5s, like 4.58, something like that in the 40, or maybe even, I think he ran low 4.5s, whatever. A little bit faster than Demetrius Knight, but also a little bit smaller. They're not necessarily going to play the same position, but after they draft, I mean, he looks like a good linebacker. Like I said, he can probably play pretty well in coverage, maybe a little bit better of a coverage linebacker, but I don't know. We'll have to see how these guys play when they actually get into the NFL, because it's easy, like I said, with Demetrius Knight Jr., it might be a little bit easier to look like a good player when you're 24 years old playing against guys who are like, potentially like 18, 19, 20 years old, fresh out of high school. You're like a grown man with 2 children tackling guys. So we'll see how these guys play when they get to the NFL, as I'll just have to keep repeating, because you never know how it's going to translate to the next level. And, human beings are so complicated. There's so many things going on. Like I alluded to with the Germaine Pratt situation, things can go a lot of different ways with all these guys. Dylan Fairchild seems like a great guy, upstanding young man. He was like 2-time high school state champion at heavyweight wrestling. Hopefully that translates into a good NFL career, but he may not be very mobile. Like I said, the running game isn't what the Bengals are looking to do. They didn't get anything like a fullback or a tight end. That was one of the other positions that was supposed to be deep in this year's draft. Not fullback, obviously. No fullbacks got drafted. The fullback position has gone extinct, unfortunately, in the NFL. It's been replaced by, big athletic tight ends who can catch. But it was a couple, top 25 players supposedly on all the draft boards were tight ends. Pretty deep tight end class. Bengals didn't go in that direction. I think they feel, again, satisfied with what they have on the roster. Bengals are very stubborn in that regard. They have a higher opinion, it seems like, of the players on their roster already than pretty much everybody else who follows the league or covers the league or plays in the league. Because, the Bengals will keep guys and not replace them. And then when they finally get rid of them, nobody else acquires these guys. Sometimes they do. Like, surprisingly, Alex Kappa, as soon as he got released by the Bengals, he was picked up by the Raiders. Plug and play them. Maybe there's a connection between Alex Kappa and Tom Brady, because they were on the Buccaneers together, and Tom Brady's the minority owner of the Las Vegas Raiders. But I was a little bit surprised that Kappa got picked up as quickly as he did. But some of these guys, especially like I said, tight end. In the defensive backfield, I was very surprised the Bengals didn't get anything there. Defensive interior, that was another position that was supposed to be deep in this draft, and the Bengals did not address it. I won't say failed to address it. Maybe that wasn't their strategy, because maybe they feel comfortable with the players they have there already. But the guys that they picked, that's the thing, is the Bengals, I feel like they say, well, we already invested picks in those guys. We're not going to invest more picks in that same position. We're going to keep the guys we already drafted, and they better work out. So guys like Chris Jenkins and McKinley Jackson that they picked last year in rounds 2 and 3, they feel like, okay, maybe they got a slow start as rookies. They had dealt with some injuries, but year 2, this is where they're going to turn it on. They thought the same thing with Myles Murphy. Maybe they're thinking the same thing about Charlie Jones and Andre Yosivage, because they didn't draft any wide receivers either in this draft. I know they only had 6 picks, but again, after they drafted the second linebacker, I was thinking, okay, why is Germaine Pratt still on the Bengals roster? They should be looking to trade him at all costs. He's requested a trade. he doesn't really help us at this point because they drafted 2 young replacements for Germaine Pratt, basically. And I just couldn't believe that throughout the whole draft, Germaine Pratt remained on the roster, even though they drafted 2 players at his same position. They're not getting any value back from that. So I don't understand why they can't move on at some of these positions. But once you get outside the top 3 rounds, once you get to that day 3, you can't really, I'm not really counting for or against any of these picks too harshly. They had Barrett Carter, linebacker out of Clemson. Then in round 5, Jalen Rivers, combination guard tackle out of Miami. He's not really big enough. He doesn't have the dimensions. He's only about 6'4" or something like that. Decent, like 315, 320, but not extremely long arms. I think his arms are only about 33 and a half inches, something like that. So not really a tackle, but not really a great athlete. He's not very fast, not really that agile. So not optimal at guard necessarily. He's kind of a utility player. I think he played all 5 positions at Miami, and he played multiple positions in the same game. They were talking about how, he had multiple games where he played guard and tackle, which is like, oh, wow, that's impressive. It's so much versatility. But if he were really good at either one of them, they wouldn't move him around. They would be like, oh, you're really good at tackle. Stay at tackle and just play that. They wouldn't move him back and forth so much. So a little bit of a warning sign in that regard. They don't normally switch people positions like all the time in a game. But he's got versatility, let's say. So he can come in and compete with one of these guys for one of those backup offensive lineman positions. Round 5, I'm assuming he's going to make the team, but it's not necessarily a guarantee. Then in round 6, Bengals went with a running back out of Texas Tech, Taj Brooks. He's Texas Tech's all-time leading rusher, over 4,500 yards and 45 touchdowns. He ended with back-to-back 1,500-yard rushing seasons. He had 17 touchdowns last season and 10 touchdowns the year before that. It's not too much of a receiving threat and not the fastest guy. But the thing that's kind of interesting, he's like built like kind of a fire hydrant he's like 5'8" or 5'9", but like 230 pounds. So kind of an interesting build, kind of that bowling ball running back, but not the fastest guy, but he's got very quick lateral, stop, start, short change of direction kind of ability. So he broke a lot of tackles. I think he broke almost 100 tackles or something like that. And he's just not going to have that breakaway speed. I think his longest run in the last few years was like 40 yards or something like that. So not tremendously fast, but Bengals, maybe they're looking for, I don't know how good he is in pass protection. That's going to be one of the things that will help him get on the field. And I don't know if this is a good sign or not. He didn't play in Texas Tech's bowl game. So he got the record for rushing and then sat out this bowl game, presumably to prepare for the NFL draft. I don't know if he went to the Senior Bowl or anything like that. I didn't see him at the Senior Bowl. Interesting that guys now are sitting out their bowl games. Like he played 5 years at Texas Tech. He was a captain. And then his last game, he decides, I think I'm going to sit this one out. Interesting decision to me, especially when you had guys like Travis Hunter, who went number 2 overall in the draft. He was playing in his bowl game with Colorado. So a guy who's, 6th round pick, did he really need to sit out? Whatever. It's a decision. He could do whatever he wants. Maybe he was dealing with some kind of injury. Who knows? But interesting choices that some guys make these days. And then that was it for the Bengals in the draft. They didn't get any 7th round picks. I was still holding on hope, even like throughout the whole time. I was like, okay, well, maybe they could still trade back and get something for Germaine Pratt, but no 7th round picks. They didn't do anything. Didn't get anything. And so, interestingly, I mentioned the Browns didn't have Travis Hunter. They did draft 2 quarterbacks. They drafted Dylan Gabriel, quarterback out of Oregon, in the 3rd round. He's a pretty good athlete. He's left-handed. They got these left-handed quarterbacks coming back in the league. Michael Penix with the Falcons last year as a left-handed quarterback. So they're not dead. But then in the 5th round, Browns decided to pick up their 2nd quarterback in Shedeur Sanders. And everybody, all the draft analysts were talking about what a shock it was that Shedeur had slipped, quote unquote, all the way down to the 5th round. And, ESPN was going on and on about what a travesty it was. We had the President of the United States getting on social media and commanding the owners to immediately draft the son of Deion Sanders, who must be great because he's the son of this guy. I mean, that logic doesn't necessarily apply, obviously. And to me, as an untrained football analyst, when I looked at not even all of the tape for Shedeur Sanders, but I watched Shedeur Sanders' pro day, which was not impressive at all. I watched his highlight tape from last year, which was not impressive at all. And then I watched the Alamo Bowl that he and Travis Hunter both played in, which was extremely not impressive for Shedeur Sanders. He played terrible in that game. Terribly, I should say. Adverb. Describing the way that he played. But he had a bunch of sacks, interceptions. He was holding on to the ball. Travis Hunter was screaming at him to just throw me the ball. I'm standing here wide open. Not a good performance. And then Shedeur didn't get any measurements at the combine. He didn't do any of the drills, and supposedly didn't have a good interview process with teams as well. So all those things combined together. I mean, we didn't know. I didn't know all of that about the inside interviews, but from just watching him on tape, he definitely wasn't a 1st round pick to me. I told my friend if he was named, Shedeur Johnson, and he wasn't the son of anybody famous, he would be like a mid-round, 3rd or 4th round pick because the talent just isn't there. He's not fast. He doesn't have a strong arm. He's not exceptionally quick or athletic or strong or big. So there's nothing about him that would make you go, oh yeah, this guy, 1st round pick. He's just got all this hype, and he wears a gold chain, and he's the son of some other famous guy, but he's just kind of a mediocre football player. So the fact that the Browns have him, I think is fine with me because he's not going to be any good on the football field. He's just going to be, if anything, just more of a distraction and some bright, shiny object that the Browns want to jingle for their fans. Hey, look, we got something interesting over here for you to talk about. And to their credit, after the draft, he had the number 1 top-selling jersey of all the rookies. Even though this guy was, almost out of the first, top 200, he's getting close to, what was he, pick number, I guess he was pick number 155 or something like that. But everybody's talking about 155th pick. Who cares? There's obviously every other team had multiple chances to draft him and decided not to. And it's not like there's some kind of conspiracy against him. It's like, even if he were a complete asshole, if he were good, teams will draft him. If a player has the talent, the skill, there's lots of crazy motherfuckers who they bomb the interview, but teams don't care because they look at the tape. They're like, oh, this guy is a maniac. Like Jalen Carter. I don't know. Jalen Carter probably could have slept through every interview that he had, but they turn on the tape. They see this guy is destroying teams every play. He's an animal. Nobody can block him. Yeah, we'll pick that guy. That's not what you see from Shedeur Sanders. You see very mediocre play. So the talent didn't override and probably even just worsened whatever bad vibes he was putting out there during the interview process. But I think it's just great that basically, to me, the Browns didn't get better. Maybe they got better, but again, they don't. Do they really care? Do the Browns care about winning football games? I don't know. Maybe it's a race to the bottom. Browns and Bengals both competing to get the. I don't know. I don't know what they're trying to do. I think the Browns are trying to tank for another quarterback next season because they're bringing in Joe Flacco. They got Kenny Pickett on the roster. They got Dylan Gabriel, Shadur Sanders. None of those guys is, a top quarterback that would even compete with somebody like Joe Burrow. So, from Bengals' point of view, the Browns draft was great, I thought. I'm not really that concerned about Mason Graham. I think he's another one of these guys a little bit overhyped. He's a good football player, I'm sure. Maybe he could work out to be like a Geno Atkins. But the fact that the Browns took him at number 5 overall, not great value, as they would say. But Bengals only came away with 6 picks in the draft. There was obviously some free agents that were rumored. I don't think these are official yet because they haven't signed their contract, but they got a quarterback, Peyton Thorne, out of Auburn, Quali Conley, running back out of Arizona, Jamoy Mays, wide receiver out of Cincinnati, Jordan Moore, wide receiver out of Duke. All these guys have, just kind of okay statistics, but nothing amazing, like a few hundred yards receiving here or there, 500 yards receiving, 600 yards rushing, whatever. But no, amazing guys. Caleb Etienne, maybe interesting just because he is huge. He's another huge human being. 36-inch arms on Caleb Etienne. I think he's about 6'7" or 6'8", 330 pounds. Pretty good broad jump. He was first team All Big 12 last season. He transferred from, maybe it was Oklahoma State, I want to say, to BYU. So the fact that they got him as an undrafted free agent, he's got potential. So he could be one of those guys who, if they can keep him on the practice squad as a backup offensive lineman, that would be great. A lot of fans are also excited about backup center Seth McLaughlin, played for the Ohio State Buckeyes, but he tore his Achilles last season and did not play in the playoff. But if he can come back, people projected him as being a mid-round pick. He did win the Remington Trophy as the nation top center in college football before that injury last season. So he could be, one of those value picks if he's able to come back from that injury strong. They also did pick up a tight end out of West Virginia, Cole Taylor, Rashad Owens, wide receiver out of Oklahoma State. So those were some of the notable offseason free agent or undrafted rookie free agents coming in to potentially fill some of those holes on the roster. I also saw they got a long snapper to compete with Cal Adamitis. I forgot what his name was, but some competition because there was some pretty questionable snapping going on by Cal Adamitis last season. He needs some competition. I'm surprised they didn't get any place kicker competition for Evan McPherson. We're going to see. He's coming back from that groin injury. I'm not sure if he needed surgery on it or if he was able to just rehab without surgery last season, but coming back, he was on injured reserve. Evan McPherson, Money Mac. We're going to have to see how he looks when he comes back. Let's quickly recap the numbers these rookie draft picks are going to have. So round 1, Shemar Stewart, he's going to be number 97, Geno Atkins' old number, and he said he was aware of the legacy he needs to uphold there, so hopefully he's able to live up to that and be as great a player as Geno Atkins. That's going to be a high bar. Demetrius Knight, the second-round linebacker, he's going to wear number 44. Dylan Fairchild, guard in round 3, he's going to wear number 63. Barrett Carter, he's going to wear number 49 as that linebacker. Then Jalen Rivers is going to be wearing number 74 as that offensive Bengals are listing him as an offensive tackle, but he's going to move around between guard and tackle. And then Taj Brooks is going to be wearing number 25 as a running back, which pretty much means that Chris Evans is no longer going to be on the team. He was number 25 previously. So Bengals picked Chris Evans out of Michigan in the 6th round, but he missed all of last season with a patellar injury that he suffered in preseason training camp in Chicago against the Bears. That was also when Dante Smith injured his patellar tendon. He's probably not going to be coming back this season, especially with Jalen Rivers on the roster. A lot of draft analysts did not like this draft class for the Bengals. But if you look at all these players, they're all draftable players, basically. None of these guys are undraftable. I can't say that I am in love with any of these draft picks necessarily, but if they turn out to be great players, I definitely will give the Bengals credit. The only thing we can say is we'll see. But it's going to be a big challenge, especially because every team is looking to get better. The Bengals did, to their credit, they got T. Higgins re-signed to the roster. They got Jamar Chase done. They still have that Trey Hendrickson thing lingering out there at this time. And that's still a major stumbling block because Trey Hendrickson was unquestionably the best player that the Bengals had on defense last season. Without Trey Hendrickson, just imagine how bad the Bengals defense would have been last year. I mean, they were bad, but they would have been so much worse without Trey Hendrickson. They wouldn't have won. I don't know if they would have won any games last season without Trey Hendrickson. Like, he was the reason they were winning a lot of those games that they did win. A big reason why. So that's kind of why he has the leverage. I can see where both sides are coming from. The Bengals are like, okay, Trey Hendrickson, he's got all the leverage because he knows he was our best player on defense, and he's vastly underpaid. But we need some leverage ourselves. They didn't go out in free agency, and that was the other thing that was disappointing is as the Bengals, they waited until after free agency was over, basically, to sign T. Higgins and Jamar Chase. That then, by the time that they kind of had that figured out to where they had a better idea of what their draft or their salary cap position was going to be, then all the good players were already signed with a bunch of other teams. So it's kind of like the Bengals were like, I don't know if they were doing that on purpose, so they could be like, oh, well, oops, we did want to sign all those other expensive guys, but it's too late now. So they've got a bunch of salary cap space remaining that they could use on players, but they're biding their time. I don't know what they're waiting for, but again, I'm hoping for a better start to the season than there was last year. I still can't think of a more disappointing game in recent Bengals history than that game against the New England Patriots last season where just Bengals came out so flat. It wasn't just the mistakes of Tanner Hudson fumbling when he's walking into the end zone or Charlie Jones fumbling on a punt return. It was the fact that the first 3 offensive series of the season, when the Bengals have, trained all summer, all training camp to come in for this game, this opponent, and they came in and 3 and out, 3 and out, 3 and out. Punt, punt, punt. Didn't move the ball even a little bit. Just total ineptitude offensively to start off the season against a team that turned out to be one of the worst teams in the league. That was just so stunning to me as a Bengals fan because we had been told all throughout that offseason, what? Oh, the only reason that the Bengals weren't competitive was because Joe Burrow got injured. And if Joe Burrow is healthy, Bengals will be right back into Super Bowl contention. Now, to be fair, that was Joe Burrow's first came back from that wrist injury. He had surgery in the offseason. And so maybe he wasn't himself to begin the season. But Bengals can't have another start to the 2025 season like they have had the previous 3 seasons. The previous 3 seasons, they've started off 0-2 at the best. So Bengals need to, I'm not going to say start fast, but they need to win some games to start off the season. And looking at the draft picks, I'm not overly confident. I'm not really feeling it. I'm not here to sell you on this, Bengals fans. You know, that's the team, that's the job's team, the team's job. And the job of some of these beat reporters who, coincidentally, just broke this news story that B.J. Hill, defensive tackle who the Bengals just signed this offseason to a 3-year extension and is going to be 30 years old, he was seen at the Bengals facility walking around in a walking boot. So he's got some kind of injury he's dealing with. The season is a long time away, so he's not going to, he's going to have plenty of time to rehab whatever it was he needed to rehab. But obviously, not good news that this guy they just signed to a multi-million-dollar extension just months ago is in some kind of medical distress. So we'll keep an eye on that situation, see how it progresses, along with the Zach Moss neck injury, see how that progresses. We're going to see how this offseason progresses in general. There's guys who are coming back from injury like Logan Wilson. I think it's assumed that Logan Wilson is just going to come back and be better than ever. A lot of these guys, after they get injured, they say, actually, I'm feeling better than ever. That was what Myles Murphy said last season. He was coming back from his MCL strain at the beginning. He said, actually, I feel more explosive than before I got hurt. and he had 0 sacks all season. So, some of these guys be lying. They be lying. But, everybody, Logan Wilson, a year ago, he said that the communication was the reason that things weren't going well. This year, the story is simplification. They said, we just needed to simplify last year. That's why we got better at the end and won 5 games in a row, is because we made everything simple. So apparently, that's what they're going to do this year, I guess. I don't know. We'll see what the story is this year. If it's communication, simplification, purification, whatever it is. They just need to figure out how to play defense and get some turnovers. That's what they were missing last year, was they couldn't get any pressure on quarterback because nobody could do anything besides Trey Hendrickson. So they couldn't get any turnovers. They weren't getting any fumbles, weren't causing any interceptions. They weren't covering anybody. They weren't tackling anybody. They weren't doing much anything on defense until the very end when they were playing quarterbacks and teams who were actively trying to lose, like the Cleveland Browns. So it's going to be an uphill battle. But like I said, it's all offseason. This is going to be another Royal Rumble of, we got a chance this year. We're going to be in the Rumble this year. Whatever. I mean, they're going to be a team. They're going to go out there and play some games. We'll get a chance to see who they play coming up shortly. The schedule is going to be released May 14th. So we already know the opponents. Just a matter of where and when and in what order the Bengals are going to play them. But probably not too much other Bengals news going around. What else? In the NFL, in the AFC North, let's cover some AFC North news quickly. AFC North Ravens, they had a pretty decent draft according to all the draft analysts. Everybody liked the picks that they had. But at pick 59, Ravens picked a defensive edge, Mike Green, who was projected to go in the first round, but had multiple sexual assault allegations, which were never proven, never investigated, but there's questions. And to me, yes, Shemar Stewart, I'm sure it was annoying for him to get questions from all these reporters. As soon as he gets drafted, how come you didn't have more production in college? How come you only have 4.5 sacks in college? What was up? How were your hands broken? Why couldn't you tackle guys? And I forgot to mention one of the other concerning statistics. Not only did he not have a lot of production, but his missed tackle rate, Shemar Stewart, something like 26.5 or 27%, which is extremely high. That's like almost 1 out of every 4 tackles, basically, he missed, which is insane. That's way too many tackles to be missing at the college level. And when you get to the NFL, guys are, even going to be even harder to tackle. So we'll have to see how he turns all that athleticism into tackling guys. I think I'll have to look it up, but I think in 37 games, he might have only had like 30 solo tackles or something like that. Not a tackling machine, as they would say. But I would rather have to answer those type of questions than the questions about sexual assault that the Ravens, and I didn't go back and look and like see how the Ravens reporters covered it. I don't think the Ravens made him available immediately to the media after he got drafted. He's going to have to face the music and answer the questions from the media eventually. I don't know how quickly the reporters are going to pounce on that, or if it's going to be kind of like, hey, welcome to Baltimore. We're going to hold off on the questions about the sexual assault allegations until maybe the second week. We'll see. But I think the Bengals wanted to steer well clear of any players who any kind of questions like that, especially after the Germaine Pratt whole saga that he went through last season. If the Bengals pick another guy like that, it's going to be like, what are you guys doing? Along those kind of lines, Ravens released their longtime legendary kicker, Justin Tucker, who had kind of a similar situation to the Deshaun Watson, where he was getting overly aggressive in a sexual nature with some massage therapists. I don't know. I've never been to one of these massage parlors, so I don't know what goes on. But I'm assuming you're not supposed to be doing whatever Justin Tucker was accused of doing. So he's not going to be on the Ravens anymore. They drafted a kicker in the 5th or 6th round. So the writing was on the wall for him, but they made it official by releasing Justin Tucker. And it's yet to be seen whether another NFL team is going to take a chance on him. Probably you want to wait to see how the NFL investigation plays out, to see if anything comes of this. There's no like criminal charges pending, and as far as I know, no, there may be a civil lawsuit. I think it's just like the NFL is investigating and gathering more information. But the other thing was Justin Tucker was just missing too many kicks last season. He cost them games. He cost them points. He was missing just too much. So if you're not doing your job, it's time for the team to move on in the NFL. And your career, even if it's a Hall of Fame career, is going to be over as soon as you stop producing. That's kind of how the way it goes these days. Everything is cutthroat. So Ravens got rid of him. In Pittsburgh, they still have an unusual quarterback situation. They got rid of their 2 starters of last season in Russell Wilson and Justin Fields, but they still don't really have what you would call a starter. They brought back Mason Rudolph, who was with them for a number of years. Then he was with Tennessee, started a few games for Tennessee last season when Will Levis became clearly not the answer. They brought him back. I forget who else they have on their roster as backups, but nobody with any kind of serious credentials as a starting quarterback in the league. So it's assumed that Aaron Rodgers is going to be playing for the Steelers, but it's not official yet. We don't know. Maybe he's just kind of holding out. He said that he's got stuff going on, personal issues that require his attention right now. So who knows what's going on with Aaron Rodgers. He's not on the Steelers, but it's looking like it's headed that direction. So Bengals could be seeing a lot more of Aaron Rodgers twice a year, which the way he's been playing, I mean, he's getting up there in age. He's in his early 40s. It's a young man's game. So if the Bengals have to play a 40-something-year-old quarterback in the cold twice a year, I wouldn't be necessarily against it. But Aaron Rodgers is one of those rare quarterbacks who could potentially be like a Tom Brady and play successfully even when he's like 45 years old. Hopefully that's not the case against the Bengals, but it's something to keep an eye on as a Bengals fan. One of the other pieces of news that's coming in just today, so I might as well work it into this episode while I'm recording, is that news that Geno Stone, safety for the Bengals, had just taken a pay cut. Ben Baby of ESPN is reporting this. Let's see what the pay cut. It was cut by $1.6 million roughly. But $1.5 million of the salary will be guaranteed. There's a quote from Geno Stone that I'm not sure what this means. He said he never heard about it. So I don't know if this was like I don't know how can a team just like, if you got a contract with a guy, somehow, okay, so he said, Geno Stone said, if you're taking a pay cut, they're clearing their space for a reason. I don't know what they're doing. They never told me. I didn't ask. At the end of the day, they're doing what they need to do that's best for the team. I don't know how that works. If you have a contract and then they're just like, actually, you know what? We're going to tear up that contract and pay you less. Contracts don't normally work like that, where one side can just decide to renegotiate the terms of the contract without the other side agreeing to it. That's a new one to me. So we'll have to see if anything else. You would think there'd be some kind of a complaint from the players' union, but I mean, I wouldn't be surprised. Like the teams in the NFL have so much more leverage over the player. I mean, just think about, like I said, in most contract situations, both parties have equal rights, and the contract must be, upheld by both sides. But in the NFL, you can have a contract with a team, but at any moment, the team can decide to terminate the contract, cut you, release you off the team, like Justin Tucker. Justin Tucker was still under contract with the team, but the Ravens decided, actually, you know what? Contract terminated, and you're gone. And you don't have any, or any way to fight back against that. That's just kind of, you're out of luck. So this is kind of interesting that the Bengals kind of unilaterally decided we're going to lower Geno Stone's salary. I mean, he didn't play up to what they were paying him for, but it's interesting that they could just decide for him. Usually it's a decision of like, we're going to cut your salary or we're going to release you. But seems like they just said, we're going to cut your salary, the end. So that's interesting. But the Bengals are freeing up space for what? Hopefully it's to make some kind of moves to make the team better. Like before the draft, Duke Tobin said, well, we don't want to pay money, or we don't want to pay more money to have the same team we had last year, which makes sense. You obviously want to have a better team than you had last year, especially because they didn't make the playoffs last year. So you can't say that the team was good enough. There's definitely room for improvement. And if you need to improve, I understand why you don't want to pay the same money, but that's kind of what the Bengals have seemingly been doing. They paid more money for T. Higgins and Jamar Chase. They paid more money for Mike Gesicki and B.J. Hill. They're, reducing Geno Stone's salary by a little bit. They reduced Zach Moss's salary by a little bit, but those are kind of drops in the bucket compared to what they are looking to pay Trey Hendrickson as an increase. There's still some moves to be made by the Bengals, I hope, this offseason. Some people are still looking for them to sign maybe a veteran cornerback, maybe another offensive guard, something, because the Bengals have room. And everybody's talking about this should be, the Super Bowl window. The Royal Rumble has got to be ours this year, right? We'll see, as I've said like 50 times already this episode. But I'm not sure when the next episode of this podcast is going to be. Like I said, this podcast is brought to you by absolutely nothing. I'm not sponsored by anybody, which means I don't have any financial incentive necessarily to make this podcast. It's just kind of whenever I'm motivated to make a podcast. And I feel like I've got something to say that isn't being said by every other Bengals podcast out there. Hopefully you like this podcast. You found it entertaining or interesting, or at least not the worst podcast ever. Like I said before, the worst podcast is the podcast that doesn't exist. So this podcast is better than the worst, right? So if you liked it enough to listen again, subscribe, give me a thumbs up, leave me a comment. Let me know, what did you think about the draft and the moves that the Bengals have made so far in free agency? Have they done enough? Are they getting better? Are they getting worse? Mike Hilton is still out there unsigned as a free agent. Is anybody going to sign him? Probably not. But we'll be back probably, I don't know, sometime whenever some news happens. It'll be before long. Joe Burrow will be doing something newsworthy, I'm sure. He was just recently in the headlines. He was at the Formula One race in Miami, and then he was at the Met Gala in New York City, showing off his style. So he had, like a suit, and he's got the watch and the hair and the chain and all this stuff. Joe Burrow doing his stylish off-season stuff as he does, trotting all over the globe, probably in a private jet. He can afford it. He's not riding commercial, let's be honest. So good for Joe Burrow. He's probably teamed up with Justin Jefferson. He's got his super swimsuit model girlfriend who's his employee, but whatever. I hope Joe Burrow, number one, moved and or got security for the house, because you can't be having people breaking in, knowing where he lives, getting doxxed. That's a scary situation. These professional athletes got to watch out. Everybody watch out there, because it's crazy. But until next time, I'm going to leave you guys with the Hoo Day and stay hungry for more Bengal Bites.